Thank you all for being here. I know we'll have some late arriving people. I really appreciate you being here for our monthly third Thursday IHE Lunch and Learn. Today I get to play both host and presenter, and it is an honor to speak to you today about my summer trip to Poland, to Germany and Poland, as a part of the Nuremberg to the Hague program. I'd like to do for my presentation in a few different ways and parts to it. One is I'd like to tell you how IHE got involved in, or the steps in which now we're involved within the Creighton Law School's program, and then to share a little bit of history behind that, and then to share with you my experience of being both in Nuremberg this summer and in Krakow, Poland, and when in Krakow, Poland, going to Auschwitz-Birkenau. So first of all, I'd like to say that I'd like to thank the Steinberg Family Foundation, who assisted in funding IHE's role within this program. In the fall of 2018, Creighton Law School and the professor there, who also at that time was the interim dean, Mike Kelly, who is the professor in charge of the Nuremberg to the Hague program, came to Howard Epstein as the head of the foundation of the Jewish Federation of Omaha's foundation, with a request for assistance with to see could the foundation help them with securing some funding that they needed to continue their long-standing program of the Nuremberg to the Hague. And Howard suggested that he would see what he could do, but also suggested that programmatic-wise, that they may want to start to speak with the Institute for Holocaust Education, a part of the Jewish Federation of Omaha, and that possibly there could be some work we could do together. So in the fall of 2018, we had a meeting, and we decided that it would be absolutely amazing if we could pool our resources together, and that we would help and assist in some of the programming locally on the Holocaust, and that we would see also what would happen as far as towards the future, a member of our department going with them for part of the program. And so that began our relationship. And in the fall of 2018, we said, okay, well, let's see what can happen. So a few months later, in 2019, we did a lunch and learn for the students going on the program, and that was with Dr. Fred Cater, a part of our survivor community. For those of you who don't know his story, he was a hidden child. At 4 years old, he and his mother were told to report to the train station in Belgium in the community they lived in, and at 4 years old, and when they got to the train station, his mother said, "Walk away." And he did that, and he was rescued by a nun and grew up, spent the war in an orphanage, and was the only member of his family to survive. For another time, talk more about that. And we then, in 2019, it wasn't the time yet for us to be involved in going to Poland with them, but the program itself did happen in 2019, actually years before too, but in 2019 it did. And again, the program is called Nuremberg to the Hague. It is a program where law students, mainly from Creighton University, and also Chapman University in California, and then scattered a few law students from around the country, study international justice, and also study about the Holocaust in different locations in Europe. They're in Amsterdam, they're in Nuremberg, they're in Krakow, they're in numerous other places. And what we thought at that point was, come 2020, IHE would accompany them on the program. Well, we all know what happened in March of 2020 with the problems caused by COVID. And not only could we not travel by health reasons, there was also a stop on travel from the university I mean, we all know the story. So so we spent the summer of 2020 working to secure the funding that would be needed to have IHE's involvement and to help with what Creighton University with the law school would need. And again, the Steinberg Family Foundation is our grantor, and we are honored to have their involvement. And then Mike and I began the plans to, well, what will we do? How would we continue from there? So our plan, we had hoped in 2021 that we would be able to, in the summer of 2021, that we would be able to have this program. And though things were better, it didn't happen. And we were going to try to do a mini type of program in California at Chapman University, but that didn't happen either. So again, we were on hold. So last fall, all of the parties involved got together, and we began to be cautiously optimistic that this program would happen. And we proceeded with, well, what would IHE's role be? And the first thing that we thought of, and we did, was that we did a lunch and learn during our week of understanding for the students and others who wanted to attend, but for the students at Creighton University in the law school who would be attending the program over the summer, with Sarah Cutler. Sarah Cutler being the granddaughter of B. Karp, of blessed memory, a longstanding member of both our IHE Speakers Bureau and also involvement within IHE. And Sarah spoke to the group and told the story of her grandmother, followed by questions and Sarah's unique way of connecting what she does in her life as a social worker to her grandmother's story. And it was also for these students their introduction into that there is an organization here in town, the Institute for Holocaust Education. And it was very well received, and it was an honor to have this involvement. And then we continued with the seeing and hoping that we would proceed with the summer program. And obviously, since I'm presenting, you know that did happen. And the Nuremberg to the Hague program, and I'm going to share my screen now, so give me 1 second. And I believe that you can now see part of my screen. The Nuremberg to the Hague program did continue. And the Nuremberg to the Hague program is a program whereby the students of the different institutions I said have 2 classes during as a part of their law school experience that they take on this. And one of it is on international and criminal law, but in particular in international law, that the study of international law or the implementation of this system of international law came about as a result of the Holocaust and as a result of or actually, knowing at one point, the Allies knowing that they wanted to have a system of justice to bring the perpetrators to trial, to implement a system of justice. And so the class that they take for the first 2 weeks under the direction of Professor Mike Kelly deals with the development and the implementation of international justice. Now, they arrive in early July. They actually start in Amsterdam and make their way to Nuremberg. And there's also a moot court competition, usually held in the courtroom where the trials were held. This year was held by Zoom. I arrived as follows. On July 11th, I left Omaha and proceeded to first get to Munich. And then from Munich, I went to Nuremberg and I met the group there. And so if you give me 1 second, I'm going to bring up my pictures that I want to share with you and then tell you about the experience. Just take a second for them to come up here. Here we go. So you'll excuse me, I'm a little bit of a low-tech person. I'm doing this by a virtual slideshow as opposed to a PowerPoint. I'm not very good with PowerPoint. So the location that I'm at here is right across from where we were staying in Nuremberg. And if you saw the past picture with the brochure for the program, that's the tower in the background. And Nuremberg was chosen as the location for the trial for a couple of reasons. One being that it didn't sustain a lot of damage from the bombings in Germany, and it had the facilities needed that was felt needed to carry out the system of how the trials were going to happen. So I'm going to share with you first. This is me standing on the streets of Nuremberg, right across from the hotel that we were staying at. This is the morning after I arrived. Mike Kelly and I were walking to the location where the classes for the students were held. And he said, I want to take a picture of you standing right here, which he did. And the reason for it is that in the 1930s, the exact location where I was standing, there were also numerous Nazi rallies held. And so one of the things for me that was a very mixed emotion, and actually I was telling my friend Mark and my friend Ariel here before we started that one of the things that I didn't know, as far as I have notes on how I'm going to present this and how I was going to present this, but I have very mixed emotions of things that happened on this trip. One being that if I go back to this picture here, the city of Nuremberg is absolutely gorgeous. And the people were absolutely wonderfully nice. I engaged in some really wonderful conversations with people, especially they were asking me questions about the political nature and some of the things happening in the United States. But I couldn't help but also realize that this was part of the history. And so it was almost, and I even felt the same way in Poland, very mixed emotions. These are places that there are people who feel that when you visit some of these places that for historical reason, obviously to study the Holocaust, you get in, you get out, and that you don't do certain touristy things. Again, that's some views. You'll excuse that this picture is very small. I'm going to see if I can make it bigger here. This was on my walk to where the classes were held. Very beautiful buildings and water that a river that runs through Nuremberg. Again, absolutely gorgeous. And it didn't escape me. Now, this picture I'll get to in a second on when we got to Nuremberg, but one of the highlights of my time, it got to Auschwitz, one of the highlights in Nuremberg was again, I arrived on Tuesday. I spent Tuesday wandering around the city, getting my bearings, having a meeting with a couple of the professors involved, getting to know each other. On Wednesday, I went to 2 classes, for one law class that Mike was teaching on international justice, and in the afternoon, a class taught on the Holocaust that was fascinating and interesting. And then in the evening, there was a reception that was held. The reception was supposed to be held 2 years ago, but obviously couldn't because the program was canceled in honor of the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials. And it was held at the Grand Hotel and in the ballroom of the Grand Hotel. And this is the hotel which was the staging ground for the Nuremberg trials. This is where the justices, the judges and the prosecutors stayed. This is where the system was developed by which they were going to initiate justice, if that would be the correct way of saying it. And the highlight of the evening, and there were many of them, was a lecture by a professor named John Q. Barrett, who is writing a book on the the experience of Justice Jackson. Justice Jackson was a justice on the United States Supreme Court, who was a colleague and a friend of President Roosevelt, was involved with him politically, and President Roosevelt appointed him to the Supreme Court. He was approved. He was a justice on the Supreme Court with ambitions of probably higher role within the Supreme Court. He was looking for meaning in his life. And and then, as we know, Roosevelt passed away and Truman became president. And Truman asked Justice Jackson to take a leave of absence from the court and to be the lead judge in the Nuremberg trials. And he did that. And he left the court for a year. He came to Germany, and he was responsible, or one of the people responsible, for the development of what happened in the Nuremberg trials. And you could say in many ways too, setting, and this is far reaching, but I think I could say it okay, the beginning of the implementation of international justice. Professor Barrett, I'm hoping that actually within a couple of years, with some partnership with Creighton Law School, possibly some work with a couple of the other universities here, which I've started to give an introduction to them about it, we'll bring him to this community to speak. He was absolutely fascinating. He's writing a book right now on Justice Jackson, and I think that you'd find that interesting. The next morning on Thursday, we made our way from Nuremberg back to Munich, and from Munich we took a plane to Krakow, and we got there Thursday evening. Thursday evening, I wandered from my hotel. I wandered into the kind of the restaurant area of Krakow and walked around and looked at the beautiful architecture and tried to get my bearings a little bit and try to get my head around what would happen the next day. And that was Friday morning. And on Friday morning, we took about an hour and a half bus ride. The students from the program, myself, the Professor Garan from Poland, and we were the two, if you want to say, faculty members that accompanied the group to Auschwitz. We got to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the first part, Auschwitz I, and we split the group into two groups, and I accompanied one group. Professor Garan accompanied the other group, along with each group had an amazing, amazing tour guide chosen by Professor Garan to guide us through our experience at Auschwitz. The first thing that we came to, first of all, it's very interesting. You park and then you walk to this area, and you get there and you wait a few minutes until you enter. So in a sense, you're able to start preparing yourself for the experience, and if there is a way of even saying something like that, for what is about to happen. And we began the tour standing right outside the gates of Auschwitz I. And we spent the morning going through, discussing, learning about Auschwitz I. And that's what I'd like to share that first with you, that experience. First of all, the fence, the gate above, with the words that loosely translate in English to "work will set you free." Something that was, in a sense, an oxymoron, because that was not the desire of what would happen to people who were sent to Auschwitz. As we know, that this was an intense and very thought out way of carrying out the final solution. What I found on a personal level as we looked at the gate was just the simplicity of it and the size of it. I don't know what I necessarily envision, but I often find that when there are places that I've studied historically, as someone who has a history background, my undergrad degree in history, or other places I've traveled and I've heard lectures of these places, I'm always amazed when I get to them, what I thought the size of the place was, and then seeing it there. And so again, as we walk through the gates here, it's really not a large area. And it was not lost on me first, the idea of walking through this gate and what that meant as both a Holocaust educator, a professional in this area, and then also as a person who's Jewish and who was raised Jewishly, and who all my life, in my early 60s, remember hearing the stories of survivors back from my teenage years. And I'll share one of them with you in a few minutes. Again, this is the gate, and you can see that it really was not a large opening. It was the weather that day actually was, if there's such a thing as a pleasant day at a place like this, it was not hot, and so it really was very, I mean, as far as that, you could absorb things in a different way. Again, now some of the buildings that we came upon. What I want you to notice here, first of all, Auschwitz I was an existing area. And so these buildings were taken over by the Germans and turned into what it became. But these were existing buildings, and that were then transferred to be other things. And I tried to take as many pictures as I could, and again showing just the some of the buildings. These were cell blocks. Some of them were used as barracks. Initially, the Auschwitz I was the area of, when we say Auschwitz. So as an example, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, the crematorium that you see, or that you can go into, is in Auschwitz I. And it is completely different than what we know of in Birkenau. In Birkenau, they were all also called Auschwitz II. They were all destroyed by the Nazis, and I'll show you that in a second. When we went into this building here, this is a memorial, and in that urn there are ashes, and there are in this area here, which you'll see in a second, there are artifacts of what was taken from Jews as they arrived at Auschwitz, but also we know that the way of that after the gas chamber, we know that there were the ovens and the crematoriums. I'll talk more about just another location of that at Birkenau, but this is a memorial in this building where there were other things. Now this, many of you have probably seen this model here. There are 3 of them in existence, and it is a rendering of what the process was of the gas chambers and the crematorium in Birkenau. And this model, there are 3 of them that were made, and there's one here at Auschwitz, there's one at the Holocaust Museum in DC, and there is one at Yad Vashem in Israel. And I'm drawing a blank right now at the name of the group of people. There were approximately under 20 survivors who were Jews, who they were forced to be the people who ran this part of the procedure of the final solution. And the only part that the Nazis themselves, I mean, it was obviously all under the Nazis, but the SS actually dropped the gas from the ceiling into the vents, but they took themselves out of part of the process. And in this case, prisoners were used. And in most cases, these people, the people who were involved in this, died. Okay, they got to a point where they were gassed themselves, or they died because of illness. There was rampant illness at the camp. But a handful, under 20 survived because of the death marches, because of when the Allies were getting close and they cleared out Auschwitz, Birkenau. They were able to survive, and they were their testimony was recorded. There's actually a professor who I heard speak a number of times a few years ago when I used to study at Yad Vashem, who spoke about how this group, how it ran. But our knowledge of, much of our knowledge of how this process happened is from them. In this part of Auschwitz, there also is they shaved the heads of Jews, of prisoners. The hair was actually used. I believe it was used in the stuffing of mattresses. And so this is an example of some of that. Obviously, very upsetting seeing these things. This was a case just of Talism, Jewish prayer shawls. To me, there's a number of things which I'll talk about in a second that really, for me as someone who is Jewish, but also religiously, that really hit me was on the neck piece. The neck piece, those are silver beads. And I have always wanted a tallis where you can do that. That had it's kind of traditional to have that area of your tallis that way. It's something that you may see sometimes in some men in synagogues. Just it was something for me just in my childhood always found very beautiful. And so seeing this here, that connection that to something from just my own background Jewishly or religiously, and knowing the what that probably meant to the people who individually these prayer shawls and these talism belong to. Now, what's interesting in the next few pictures that I want to show you is, and you can look at this in a number of different ways. And our tour guide was talking about that when people arrived at Auschwitz, they arrived with a suitcase. They arrived with things in their pockets. But what they were also indications of were a few things. One is they're not knowing what was going to happen to them. Their want and desire to return to where they were from, and also elements of their identity. So, for example, these talism, these talitot, each talis prayer shawl, these were in possession of men who had them in their suitcases, in their possessions, whether it be probably there's a daily ritual in the morning service of wearing this. These were observant people. Shoes. I tried to zero in on a few things. There's obviously just showing the sheer number, and there's in a number of Holocaust museums, the museum in DC, sometimes in some traveling exhibits, they'll have things like eyeglasses, shoes, and it's very overwhelming because just the sheer number of it. To me, what I tried to, what I wanted to focus in taking this picture were the shoes of children. 1.5 million children died. And obviously, as a father, as an educator, as just a human being, this is very troubling. And I mean, every life is troubling, but the idea of childhoods just that just came to an end. What also for me was just just in comparison, was the red shoe, even though these have been here in this case for quite some time. And for me, what I connected it to, though I will tell you, I don't think that was the reason for it, was that if we all know the story of Oskar Schindler as a righteous among the nation, as a righteous Gentile who was responsible for saving approximately 1,400 Jews, that what happened in his experience was that he came upon an area where he saw a girl, a child with a red coat. And if you remember in the movie, Spielberg uses color in the film only twice. Once in the beginning with the lighting of Shabbat candles, and two with, you could say three at the end too, but two with the child in the red coat. So these shoes absolutely, all of these things just trigger your emotions. Again, more of the shoes. Now, this is a case just with suitcases. And what was pointed out to us were in the suitcases were the people's names, phone addresses, that people came with their suitcase with the idea that if they got separated from their suitcase, or just as we use luggage tags today, that they would at one point be going back to where they came. I think that part of this, my own opinion here, is Jewish optimism. The idea that we take what we're given, and that we're always this desire that something good will happen. Maybe something in the past in history that we had situations in which we were separated from our communities. We faced persecution. At some point it ended. It didn't usually end in, well, it didn't end in for example, the Holocaust. We then proceeded to walk more through Auschwitz I. This is some of the barbed wire, obviously up separating parts of the camp. People were keep people in just go to this next, let me go back here in a second. In the case on the top of the fence of these, many of them were electrified, obviously to keep people, so that to keep people inside. I'm a very within senses. I mean, I went up and just touched it, just to I guess just to elicit that emotion too. That just that this is all very real. We then proceeded to the area where the commandant of Auschwitz lived, and it was right in this area, right over here. You can't go over in that area, but his house was right next to, actually within probably 2 football fields away from the crematorium. And so much so that when that his family was there with him, and when he was arrested, his wife asked if she and the kid and their children could stay in the house there. Just unbelievable in that idea. Now, also in this area, he was found guilty, and this is the area where he was hung, was right at this point here, and has been left up now as a it was after, obviously after the Nuremberg trials. After this, the area was then officially turned into a museum, and which is also kind of interesting, just that given that some of the Polish involvement. Next to this area over here are where the crematoriums are, and this is, we weren't allowed to take pictures in the gas chamber or crematorium, but this is the entryway at Auschwitz I to the building that was used as both the gas chamber, and then there were 2 ovens there. And it is you can't put it into words, what you, or feelings. I found myself, I'm an emotional person to begin with. I found that walking through Auschwitz I in particular, I found my emotions to be, if you see, wearing them on my sleeve. I found myself at points getting very, very teary-eyed, at other points becoming very introverted. I tried to really keep my eyes open to observe everything around me. Was not lost on me the amount of tour groups that were there, the amount of different languages I heard. I will say that watching other groups, I was very happy to see that it looked as though everybody was taking this experience very seriously. From there, in Auschwitz I, we proceeded to see some of the other buildings. This building here, building 10, is the infamous Block 10, where Dr. Mengele and other doctors, people who had taken an oath to treat medically people who did very heinous, who performed very heinous experiments. As we all know, the experiments on twins. This area is generally closed. It is not open to the public. Professor Kelly told me that one year, because of a group of nurses that were there, they were able to actually go into and see things in there, but generally it is not a part of the tour of Auschwitz. I mean, if you know what happened there and then you see what happened, I mean, as far as, again, being in these places, really was challenging with one's emotions. Again, walking down where some of the other buildings are, as you can see up on the top here, where the fences would have been electric. And then again, I took a picture just looking in, but what wasn't lost on me was, in this case, we had left and walked out. And two things to go along with that. My sister, my brother-in-law, my parents in the 1990s, late 1990s, 96 actually, went on from their synagogue in the Detroit area, went on the March of a Living for adults. The March of a Living was created some 30-some years ago, where a program where mainly it was started with high school kids from the United States, other parts of the world, would go to Auschwitz-Birkenau along with a survivor on their bus, would experience Auschwitz-Birkenau as we did. And then from there, they would proceed to go to Israel. They would be there for Yom HaShoah, here, the day of remembering of the Holocaust. And then they would go to Israel for Yom HaTzmaut, for the anniversary of the birth of Israel. From the lowest part of modern Jewish history, if not all of Jewish history, to the highest point, the reestablishment of the state of Israel. My mother, when I was talking to her last early spring about that, it looked like I was going there, she said one of the things that occurred to her was the idea that as a Jew, we walked in, a modern Jew, I mean today, a person of today, we were able to walk in, but we were also able to walk out. And one of my mentors and teachers saw a couple pictures I posted on Facebook of this experience, and he and I were having an email exchange, and he actually said the same thing. He said, you and I are a part of the few of our people who can say that not only did we, that we walked in, but we were able to walk out. And I think when we look at, and by no means do I want to ever compare myself to anything within our survivor community, what they went through is something that hopefully humanly I will never personally understand. But what I do think of my experience here is the idea of bearing witness and an obligation to tell what I, or to show what I saw, to be a part of it that way. And again, usually I'm pretty organized in knowing what I'm going to say in something, but because this experience was so intense, and I've been trying to write now, I've been back since the 18th of July. I've been trying to write an article for the Jewish press, and usually I can write an article in a matter of a day. I'm having trouble putting it all down in words because it was so so gripping in such a wide way. From right here, we had a break. We were at the visitors center. I had a cup of coffee and waited to then get on our bus and go over to Birkenau or Auschwitz II, which is about 2 miles from Auschwitz I. Now, this next picture. In my, I would say, naive understanding or limited understanding of Auschwitz-Birkenau, for whatever reason, I always put this building here and the gate that I showed you back here as one, and they're not. This complex here, Birkenau, Auschwitz II, came about as a result of the final solution being in full force and the realization that Auschwitz I, they didn't have the room to do what they wanted to do. And even like the barracks, which they showed us in Auschwitz I, which were quite different. They were brick buildings with rooms. We did go through actually the torture chambers in the basement. That's for another time. But we now went over to Birkenau, and I found we were in a parking lot over about a quarter of a mile away. We walked over to this area, and a different set of emotions hit me at this area, and I'm not sure why. We walk through the gate here. This is the area where the trains would have come through. This main area here. Again, the train tracks going into Auschwitz. The entrance was to the left of this area, as far as the area where you come in with your tour group. Again, looking back from the train tracks to the building where the vast majority of those who were killed came through. Right here in this area, this is a cattle car that was used. It's in the spot where the selection would occur. Most of you have seen the very famous picture or famous pictures that of the selection process. If you've been to our exhibit at the museum, at the SAC Museum, they're a part of, those pictures are a part of the exhibit. Those pictures were taken by the SS to document. It was the only documentation, official documentation of all of this. It was taken late in the war. It was taken during the Hungarian deportation to Auschwitz. It was kind of the real thrust at the end to rid Eastern Europe of Jews. It was part of the major task of Adolf Eichmann to make sure that this happened. But it was in this very area right here that the separation took place, the selection took place, the two lines. And a story was shared with us of someone who had the experience of where their family was separated, and the older family member, not old as in age, but like a young adult, was sent in line with a younger sibling that he told to get into the other line. And then that other line went to be gassed immediately. And to me, it really, it hit a real emotional point right there. I have a friend of mine who I grew up with. His name is Rabbi Marty, or he wasn't even Rabbi, his name is Martin Pasternak, Marty Pasternak. He's on the East Coast now. Marty's a couple years older than me. And Marty's father, Abe, was a survivor of Auschwitz. And when I was a young person, I mean, a teenager, again, this is in the 70s, there weren't as many survivors speaking. I think a lot of that happened after Schindler's List and the Spielberg Foundation's work to, excuse me, to really get stories told. But Marty's father, Abe, was a speaker in the community where I grew up in Detroit. And I had remembered a story, and I actually use it when we go through the story, the selection explanation at the museum here. In this case, Marty's father, Abe, and his older brother were sent in one line with a younger brother, and the rest of the family, which included his parents, were sent in the other line. In the line where Marty's father and older brother were, and the younger brother, they felt that the younger brother, they weren't going to be able to take care of him. They didn't know where they were going, but they felt that he would be better off working his way into the other line and finding their parents. And so they told him to go sneak into the other line, into the other area to be with his parents. Needless to say, that other line was sent to be exterminated, to be killed. And Marty's father and older brother spent the rest of their life always feeling that they were responsible for what happened to their younger brother, when in truth, they were doing what older siblings should do with a younger sibling, is you need to be with mom and dad. They can take care of you better. I remembered that story from when I was a teenager, and I don't even remember when I heard Abe speak, but I remembered that, and it had always been a part of my knowledge base of the Holocaust. When I got back here to Omaha, I got a hold of Marty and said, you know, Marty, I remember the story from your father. I use it in some of my teaching. Do you have any more detail, or am I correct that this is a part of your dad's testimony? And he said he wasn't even sure, he didn't remember, but his sister would know. And his sister, Judy, shared with me his father's testimony. I now have that, and it was a part of it. Actually, I didn't know about the older brother being surviving too. I just remembered Marty's father, Abe. But again, I found this area here for me very emotional, and to discuss the idea of the selection based upon my memory of Marty's father, Abe. Now, in Birkenau, there's an area where there is a memorial to what happened here and the countries from which people came. And I just took a couple of pictures of the plaques were there. Our tour guide talked about that she wasn't a person who the memorial is very big and very box-like. And she said it's kind of very evident that it was built by the Russians during the communist era. This is again part of the memorial. We sat on the side there and looked over into the rubble that you see here. This rubble and the one next to it are where the death chambers, where the gas chamber was and where the crematorium was, where in front of that the prisoners entered, walked down below, took off their clothes, went into what they thought would be a shower. We all know wasn't, the use of Cyclone B, and then the crematorium, then the being burned, cremated. These crematoriums were destroyed. This area was destroyed by the Nazis on their way out towards the death march to do what they could to hide the evidence. Again, another picture. Now it's fenced off, you're not allowed in that area. This is looking down into the area where, again, there would be the entryway into the rooms where this took place. So one of the areas we went afterwards in this that I want to share is this room that this is done only in the last few years. These are pictures that people had in their possession, in their pockets, in their suitcases, just regular family pictures that they kept with them, the idea that they would go home. But the other part of this, as if you've seen the wall of the community of pictures at the Holocaust Museum in DC, where it starts from the basement and goes up through the ceiling of the museum, in most cases, this is a history that was destroyed. And I'll tell you something in a second about that. These were the memories. These were people who you can see celebrations that they are no more, but they're also, we don't know about them. Again, this is this area here was another of the crematoriums, but what also happened here was that the ashes were spread into this field here, and this is actually at the end of our experience at Birkenau. And so in many ways, this area is holy ground to us, in the idea that in this area, ashes were spread. In the beginning, the ashes were used, actually, one of the ideas was to use them for fertilizer, but as the killing ramped up and as the numbers increased, there actually became a challenge as to what to do. In this case, and this is in the last parts of the war, there were so many ashes that they were spread in the field here. And this is a memorial here to that spot. There is a Jewish custom when you visit cemeteries, in a sense, when there's markers, that we leave a stone on top. And so I did that. When we were here and we had a moment to reflect, Professor Garone said to me, asked me if I would say the last words to the group at this point. And at first, I wasn't sure I was the right person, and I'm not an academic, and I wasn't sure. And I reached at first I said, I'm not sure, and then I said, yeah, I would be honored, and I was extremely honored by this. And let's see if I can do it. Excuse me. What I talked to the group about at this point was that there is a custom of Jews of Eastern European descent, which most of you know, Ashkenazic Jews. I myself, and probably most of you who are Jewish on this right now, are of Ashkenazic descent. I said there is a custom that we name our children after someone who is no longer living, who has passed, so that the idea that they will carry on some of the attributes of that person. I'm named for my great-grandfather. My children are named for relatives who have passed away. My wife named for the same thing, for her, actually for a great-grandfather, and I think someone else, I just don't remember who. And then I said, as we look into this field, there are so many people here that we'll never know who they were, and we'll never know their story. And there's no one to carry on their memory. And then I talked for a second that what we say when we learn Jewishly, when we learn that someone has passed away, one of the things we say is, may their memory be for a blessing. And then I ask them all to say that with me, may their memory be for a blessing, and and in respect and honor of those who perished here. And from there, we walked back actually to our bus. When I first decided to get more advanced training on the Holocaust in a different type of way, I had the unique ability when I was living on the East Coast for a number of years to go back and forth to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum and Educational Facility in Jerusalem, a number of times. And the first time I was there, after the first day of an intense day of study that ended with us meeting and speaking with a woman who was obviously a senior citizen now, but in her youth was a contemporary and a friend of Anne Frank. And the day was extremely powerful. That day was extremely powerful. And we went back to where we were staying, and I wandered the streets of Jerusalem for 2 hours by myself, trying to process what that day was like or what I learned. I knew that my day at Auschwitz-Birkenau, that in my head, I needed to process it. I needed to try to get to some type of understanding, because the next day, actually, I was going to be leading the debrief with the group. And so I wandered the streets of Krakow for a couple of hours just by myself to try to get my head together and wrapped around what I had seen. And a couple of things with that. I also, at each of the parts of Auschwitz, Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II, I took a stone from the trail that we were walking on, and I have them at my home, sitting on my home office, right where I can see them. And I want them, I want to be reminded of what I personally witnessed, but also what others experienced, because I don't want to take it ever for granted, but I also want to be very cognizant of, no matter what happens in my life, I believe it'll never compare to anything like that. And that if our survivors can live and tell their story and build new lives, I too can learn from that example. So the next day, my role with the group was to do the debrief of the experience at Auschwitz. I'm very glad. First of all, we had about an hour and a half, 2-hour ride back from the camp to where we were staying in Krakow. I stayed at one hotel. They put me up at a nicer hotel, which was very nice. The students stayed at another. I was very glad that we had the ride back to the hotel. Everybody was very quiet. Everybody was individually processing what they had experienced. And so the next morning, I did the debrief with the group, and these are just 2 pictures of that. Let me just, go back to that one more time. Right here and right there. And then I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to talk about that for a second, just so I can see you. What I talked to the group about was the idea of what were they going to do with what they learned. Okay, very few of them will probably go into a type of law that involves like international justice, or a type of law that involves certain types of clientele. And what I tried to speak with them about was the idea of having empathy, understanding, and to realize they were very, very impacted by what they had experienced. And that they had the ability, I felt, to make change, and never take for granted that they individually could make a difference with the people who they were going forth when they have their law career. They're all just graduating from their first year as attorneys. They have 2 more, but that they should use that experience. The next, so, and then we had that, and then in the afternoon, we heard a fascinating lecture on the Ukrainian situation, because we're only about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes away from the from where people are crossing over from the Ukraine into Poland. And so we met with a human rights attorney who was Polish, and another man who's an attorney who's Ukrainian, who have been going back and forth to trying to help the situation. One of the things I found most interesting about that was in Poland, they don't call them refugees, they call them guests. And I thought that was very human. That was very telling. I found the people of Krakow, the average person, to be very interesting to talk to. And I found the city to be very to be alive. And there are about 8,000 Jews in Poland today. I wandered during the lunch break after the debrief and a session from Professor Garon on what happened in Poland after the Holocaust. We had a lunch break, and I wandered the Jewish section that was right close to where we were staying. I did this by myself, and I purposely got myself lost in the area. And I just observed, and it was alive for Shabbat. There were some tour groups there. Thank goodness for Google Maps, because I then was able to navigate myself back to where we were for the next lecture. And then the next day, we flew back to Munich. From there, I actually proceeded back here to Omaha, but I spent a couple hours with the students, just talking to them individually, small groups, about answering their questions and discussing with them, as far as those who are at Creighton, what we would like from them, what IHE would like from them. And so what we're planning right now is that during our Portraits of Survival in November, I'm trying to put together an evening with a few of the students where we can have a conversation with our community about what they experienced. Then during the Week of Understanding, I'm hoping to do a lunch and learn with them. What I'm tentatively trying to plan is a movie that we're going to be showing to the community in November on Joseph Polanski, who settled in this community. His family made a movie. Only 70 people survived Treblinka. Only 3 of those actually escaped from Treblinka. And their father, Joe, was one of those people. And so Rose Vinny and her brother, Rose being one of the daughters, are going to be in town. We're going to premiere the film here. They're going to do a little question and answer about their father. But I'm going to be asking her if she'll also do this during March, during our Week of Understanding, if she'll do it as a part of the lunch and learn that we do with the students who will be going on next summer's program. And then also, we'll be using a couple of the students as a part of our Week of Understanding. We have to just figure out what's the right school group to send them to, but something along those lines. And then the plan is from there that over the course of the next 2 to 3 summers, possibly 4 summers, I will be accompanying the group again. And we'll see if I have a greater role, but I'm very comfortable with what the role is. I was very honored by what I was able to do. In the works in a couple of years, it may be with the 80th commemoration of the Nuremberg trials, we'd like to think about doing a community program trip possibly with Creighton University and their alumni, and members of our community here who would like to go. And so that's in the works. At this point, I'd like to see if you have any questions about the experience. Please feel free to come off mute. If you want to turn on your cameras, that would be wonderful too, but you don't need to. And just if you have a question, please go ahead and ask. Dana, are you from the New Jersey area? You're on mute. I can't hear. I'm sorry. If you're still on mute, but I think that Marty Pasternak, there's probably one in the same. He grew up in Detroit. He was in Austin for a number of years. He works for, I think, the Jewish National Fund now, and also does some other work on his own. He's actually a rabbi who writes Jewish divorces called Getz, but he's in his early 60s too. We grew up together. He knows me as Scotty. I know him as Marty. So I mean, it goes back many years. And his father Abe was a pillar of the survivor community in the Detroit area when I was a young person. Other questions? I'll bring up chat here for a second to see. Yeah, the Sonderkommando. Thank you so much, Kelly. It went in one and out the other. There are only a handful that survived of this of them. There's a professor at, he may be deceased now, from Yad Vashem, who studied them, actually became very close with them. Absolutely fascinating what was found out, because these people, for the most part, didn't survive. They were eventually died either of illness or of being gassed themselves. But a lot of our knowledge in fact, most of our knowledge of how in Birkenau, how the process worked come from them. And again, the three models that were made of that are located at Auschwitz, at the museum in DC, and the museum in Yad Vashem. And I don't take for granted that I'm honored that, though they're all the same, that I've had the opportunity to be in each place. You know, as far as, you know, being at Auschwitz-Birkenau, I had to prepare myself. I've had opportunities to be there in the past. I chose not to go at that point. I didn't feel ready. I'm in my early 60s now. I don't look upon that I'm in the twilight of my life or whatever, but within what I'm doing now and the way my life is now, I felt it was the right time. I absolutely know I was correct now, especially being able to accompany the law school, this program at Creighton. When people have been asking me about it, I've been saying it was life-changing for me. Okay, and I can't tell you why necessarily. It just is. And Professor Kelly says that every year when you go, you experience something different. And so we'll see what that means next year. But I went, both Ariel and I, and some of you others were at the exhibit, the Auschwitz exhibit that was in Kansas City this past year. And what really hit me home in that was there was an area where there were tools that were used. There was a wrench, something else, and that how normal they were. And when you look around and you see the things that make up these camps, it's all too real and it's all too normal. You want to think that, you know, yes, they were monsters, or you want to think of it in a certain way, but you cannot, it does not escape you, or you do not take for granted just the simplicity of some of the things you saw, but also the normality of what you saw. And hopefully we learn from this. Other questions, comments, feedback? Well, thank you. Next month, we are going to be hearing from Sandy Rankin. Sandy is a part of our teacher consortium. Sandy is a seasoned Holocaust educator, and she's going to be talking about her training as an educator and how she teaches, and how, for example, she's been to Rwanda. She's also what's known as a museum fellow. She works with groups, and we partner with her through the museum in DC. And I asked her if she would present, and that'll be next month. And I hope you'll find it of interest. And though that information will be out, it's the same link every month, just in case you haven't noticed. But we'll be sending out information as it draws closer, and I hope you'll be able to be there. If you want more information or have questions about what I presented about, please feel free to contact me in the IHE office, or by phone, by email. Thank you very much for allowing me to present today. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.